Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our study session. This evening we'll be discussing Goal 1, Success in the Early Years, and we have a star-studded cast here before us. So Dr. Reed, if you'd like to lead us, please do.
Yeah, thanks, Board President Swain. And Goal 1, Success in the Early Years, obviously is our foundational goal of our 5, and we're excited to present the work we've been doing. And I will turn it over. As you know, one of our assistant superintendents leads each goal, and Dr. Tracy Malloy leads the 5th. So tonight, I believe Obadiah Dunham, our assistant superintendent from the North, has taken the lead, and I'll turn it over to him to introduce staff that will be sharing our presentation this evening. Obadiah?
Good evening. Thanks for having us. It's a perfect day to be reviewing Goal 1 because we all got to spend time out in schools with kindergartner and first graders today. So they're very fresh on our mind. So we're excited to be here. And as we go through each section, each person's taking kind of a section. I will introduce them as we get to their section. And then if Siobhan, if I was able to share screen. All right, Tracy, can you just give me a nod or something if you can see the right screen? Thank you. So Goal 1, Success in the Early Years. I'm going to take you just through a couple of intro slides. And just one is the wisdom of the board of having a Goal 1. And just Michael Gelb would tell us that learning starts in the womb. And so we might as well start very early and a real focus on education. So you'll see as we go through these measures, some pretty focused instruction around this. And then we're going to hear from Doreen Milburn tonight. One of her staff members in their Head Start NECAP program had something to say about our early childhood program here at North Shore. And then Dr. Reed and I had a chance to meet Elliot this year, and Elliot is at our newest elementary school, Ruby Bridges Elementary. And one of the things Dr. Reed likes to do is ask the students what they've enjoyed and what they find challenging about learning online. And this is what Elliot said. He's really enjoyed the experience. So appreciated Elliot's insights around that. And then as a reminder, as President Swain said at the beginning, this is success in the early years. And so here's how we've chose to word the goal. And then the equity lens that comes with it, and you'll get us opportunities to kind of explore both of those pieces tonight. And as consistent with our other goals, we have 5 measures to go with this goal. The first one's about access, and then the other ones are kind of looking at some, just a few different areas. So social, emotional, physical, and cognitive development, then some very fundamental reading skills, and then just what do achievement gaps look like, in English language arts and math. And then just by looking at each subgroup, seeing how we're doing and getting each subgroup kind of focused on exceeding standards in same subject areas, English language arts and math. So we're gonna have lots of data for you guys to look at, as well as just some background on some programs. And we have some friends visiting us tonight.
Is our hope.
So a friend coming from us to Kokanee to introduce Goal 1, and just increased percentage of students who have equitable access to developmentally appropriate curriculum. So this is where Director Doreen Milburn is going to come in and talk about early childhood programs that we have and just what some of that access looks like. And then we will transition to Dr. Tracy Malloy, and she will talk about some of our other programs that have to do with access to developmentally appropriate curriculum. So Doreen, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm always excited to talk about our youngest learners that we serve here in North Shore. So I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me. So yeah.
And I was just going to say, just cue me when you want me to switch slides.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to start off talking about our birth to 3 students. So those are our youngest students that we serve here in North Shore. A couple years ago, I think came to a board session where I had talked to the school board about some possibilities of a House bill that was coming through in regards to changing some funding models for how we serve our youngest learners, our birth to 3 students. And I would like to share that Governor Inslee signed into law the House Bill 2787. And basically that is completing the transfer of our early support for infants and toddler programs from the OSPI to the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, so DCYF. And that happened on March 19th of last spring. The bill transfers that state funding funds to the ESIP program from OSPI to DCYF, and that was effective this fall, so September 1. So what that means for us here in North Shore is that the bill also states that then school districts are not obligated to provide a contract for our early intervention services to the children and families with disabilities from birth to 3. But I would like to highlight that we are still actively engaging in a really strong partnership with our community agencies. So the community agencies that I've talked a lot about are Kindering, Wonderland, Child Strive, our Deaf and Hard of Hearing programs. So we continue to still engage with the transition and the process of identifying families under Child Find, which are already served in early intervention services, from that transition to Part C to Part B services. And so it makes it a little bit unique and different this year in regards to having that change, because one of the things that we don't have is we don't necessarily have access to all the families' information as early as we normally do, because typically if a child is 3 months old and let's say was being served at Kindering or Wonderland or Child Strive, North Shore would have that contract and those families would be enrolled through North Shore School District, and now they're not. And so during that transition time, about 90 days from the child's 3rd birthday, that's when we start engaging with those conversations with our community partners, with families, and doing our evaluation process to determine if students are eligible. And then we, if students are eligible, then make sure that we have an IEP by the time their 3rd birthday rolls around. So we're really excited to be community partners with our birth to 3 agencies, and they've really been a big advocate to making this transition as smooth as possible for our youngest students and their families. I think that's good. The other thing I wanted to share around that access point is our enrollment data. So what you'll see and what I've shared through years past is we've always shared out those birth to 3 numbers. So you'll see a current trend, and we've been having a trend on all fronts of enrollment increases throughout the years. And we've talked a lot about that, the school board and I. And so what you'll see for this year, we don't have those birth to 3 numbers. And then that's exactly from what I had just shared. So COVID has definitely affected our numbers birth to 3 and for our 3 and 5-year-old enrollment. Some of the things that our families, maybe especially last spring, weren't able to do is those well child visits. Like you think about what was happening in the spring last year. So what we might have seen is families being identified through their doctor's office or through maybe their community preschool or just community support. And since families maybe weren't going out into the world like we normally do, some of those visits, well child visits weren't happening. And then the other thing in the spring, what was happening is birth to 3 agencies and us needed to start doing evaluations online. So you can imagine how tricky that might be for our youngest learners, our birth to 3 students, and even our 3 to 5. So in the spring, we put those evaluations on hold, and then we picked those up first thing when we got back to school in the fall. And so our enrollment continues to increase. And even as we transition to North Shore Learns, what I am finding, especially in this last week, given our news that's been out that we will be running mostly a 4-day-a-week program for our early childhood students here in North Shore, we've had a lot of families requesting to be re-enrolled in our programs. So what I'm hoping to see is that enrollment continue to increase.
So Doreen, just a really quick clarification. So the 0 to 2 enrollment, it's zeroed out because of that transfer according to the law. So they're not technically a North Shore student anymore, even though we partner so we can meet them when they turn 3. But it's not that COVID cost
Nope.
a complete. Yeah. Okay.
Nope,
Thank you.
it wasn't COVID related. It was really that House bill related. It just happened at that time of both things. So to be truthfully honest, it's been really complex. And just really trying to work with our Birth to 3 partners to figure out why are we maybe not having as many families accessing either Birth to 3 services, so early intervention services, or doing that transition into the school district. So it's hard to know, is it the change in the law of the process of it? Is it COVID? And my guess is probably a little bit of both. So
Thank you.
the families are definitely still out there. And I know we and our Birth to 3 partners are really trying to find families and get them into programming.
Doreen, if I could too, and this may be
Yeah.
redundant, but a lot of the slides that you've shown so far show birth to 2
Yeah.
and then 3 to 5, but it's birth to 3 and then 3 to 5. Is that right?
Yeah, I typically say birth to 3. A lot of the language might be around birth to 2, but it really is what we are responsible for is to provide an IEP for the students who qualify by their 3rd birthday. So it's right there.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, so our programs continue to thrive and grow, and we're really excited about what we're doing to offer general education programs here in North Shore for our youngest students. I strongly believe that very much supports our Goal 1 work, which will have long-lasting effects as kids kind of move through the system. So we have started our Co-Teach Ready Start. It's a blended multi-age inclusive classroom for students with special ed services, students who are on our wait list for Head Start and ECAP, and students who pay tuition. So we have ran those that all programs all through COVID this year, our Head Start, our ECAP, and our Ready Start. So that is exciting. And then our special ed programs, what we've continued with is our developmental 3s program. And what it shares there, it's just a language-based preschool program. So our students who are identified needing special ed services and support as they turn 3, those students will end up in our developmental preschool program, many of them. So we're really we did this change a couple years ago, because as you maybe can, just the difference between a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old is vastly different. And welcome to school. And we really wanted to create a space for our 3-year-olds to be 3-year-olds. We don't need to be doing, really just that push to kindergarten, which we do with our, 4 and 5-year-olds. We really wanted to have a language-rich, socially based developmental preschool classroom for kids to really highlight what it means to be 3. And it really has worked in regards, we've seen really great growth coming out of our students, and I'm really excited about that program. We continue to offer our extended day program, and it supplements our students' primary learning environment. So what that means is students who maybe need additional services to make gains on their IEPs and their goals might need an extended day program. So as we come back to North Shore Learns 4.0, due to some health and safety guidelines, we won't be offering a full day program for students in person. So we will do some sort of support for students online, and also support for families who are wanting in-person services due to cohorting. So mostly, because what you would find if you had a son or a daughter in that program, they would go to their primary classroom, they would stay for lunch and recess, and then they would go to a different classroom for extended day. So based on kind of those health and safety guidelines, we have changed it to families. We're working with individual families on their sons and daughters need to either access extended day only or access their primary classroom, but their full IEP will be in place. And then we have our phonology program, and it's that intensive program for really students with articulation needs. And that is over at Hollywood Hills still. Thank you, Obi. And then here is our access data, just a percentage of students based on race and ethnicity through our program. So you'll see that blue line is Sorensen. ECAP is kind of that orangish red, and then Head Start is that gray line.
Doreen, can you give me an idea of how many total students we're talking about in these 3 programs?
Yeah, and so I think based on when this slide was done, the N size on Sorensen is 295. Our ECAP at the time was 55, and then Head Start is 57.
And these are, I mean, I apologize for my ignorance in where the programs are
No, you're
housed.
totally fine.
They're not all at Sorensen.
They're
correct?
not. And
They're
so
not.
Head Start is located at Kenmore Elementary School. ECAP is at Woodmore, and then Sorensen, of course, is at Sorensen. And I actually think, looking at those numbers, that probably, my guess is, I bet you that's scooping up our Woodmore Ready Start numbers also, but I could clarify that because that seems too high just for Sorensen.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And so here is our enrollment data. I talked a little bit about that before. And so what you'll see is that ECAP, I think, is in that darker blue, Head Start in that kind of orangish red, Ready Start. And what Ready Start at risk means, so we support within our Ready Start program students who may just miss the cutoff for our ECAP and our Head Start programs, and we provide them as a school district a free program. I pulled up the numbers because I just wanted to get our current numbers. So currently within our Ready Start programs, we are serving 46 students who are traditionally underserved students and do not meet the federal poverty guidelines for Head Start and ECAP, but really do need a free program within North Shore. And so we provide that. So even in the time of, like, these are COVID numbers, these are different than what I would say if I was talking to you last year. This is just different data. And so we're serving 46, like I said, in Ready Start. I'm really excited that our Head Start program, or sorry, our ECAP program is full. And that is 57 students. And the great thing is I just really would like to highlight the recruitment efforts of our FSSs. So it's our family support specialists and their teams, because we, especially during a pandemic, they have really worked to find families, to get them enrolled. And it is hours. I mean, it was hours and hours before to get families enrolled, but it can be up to 10 hours per family to do the paperwork that is the requirement to get each family enrolled in our Head Start and ECAP program. And North Shore ECAP is one of the few statewide programs that is fully enrolled, which is a huge shout out. And then we are currently continue to do recruitment efforts. We're about 11 slots away from being fully enrolled in Head Start. And then if you see just one more, will you go back one more, Obi, sorry. And then our tuition family. So we are actually, even with, so we talk about inclusive practices. I've come and talked to the school board about it before. And as we did our change to our co-teach model and our inclusive practices, even during the time of a pandemic, we are fully enrolled in our tuition slots for Ready Start. So it is a want and a need from our community. They see that, they're engaging in our classrooms, and we are serving our youngest learners, and as they kind of build that foundation for future learning kind of K and up. So I'm excited about that.
Excuse me, Doreen, can you
Yeah.
clarify, is the limit for the ECAP and Head Start space at North Shore, or is there a different limit on the number of students that qualify?
Our contract has 57 per program. So that's what we contract for. So we can't go over that unless we actually sought out more slots. And sometimes those become open. I believe we do have statewide some continued open slots that North Shore could look at in the future if we wanted to look at additional ECAP slots. But I haven't heard yet if there are Head Start slots available.
But there are more ECAP kids that would qualify if we had more slots.
Yes. Yes. It's hard. The reason why I'm pausing a little bit is it's just trying to navigate what a pandemic has done to our enrollment and the recruitment efforts versus, do I believe there's families out there? Absolutely. And I think the team has worked so hard to find families and students out there that need that support. I think it's complex with families, especially during COVID, of remote services online and the access to that, because many of our families have enrolled their sons and daughters into maybe community preschools that are in person and have been. And so I think it's tricky on how families are accessing our service, because it really becomes a family response to how do we navigate a pandemic and the nuances of that.
Thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Did that answer your question, David?
It did. Thank you.
Okay.
And Doreen, if I could please take it along that same kind of line, even I guess it would be more relevant to think about pre-pandemic.
Yep.
But I wondered, if we know for certain that we have families that we've had to turn away because we don't have enough slots, and if we have a feeling for how many more families would participate if we had more slots.
So typically we've always been enrolled in both our Head Start and ECAP since we have offered that contract for our community and our students. So that has been beautiful. The part that I feel like North Shore does really well, again, is we don't turn families away. What we say is we have this Ready Start program. It's different, but I think it's still very robust, and it's a little bit different in regards to the hours that students access. But we've always had spots available in our Ready Start program to scoop up students and families that are on the wait list for Head Start or ECAP. So what we haven't been is fully enrolled yet in all three programs, but we just started that co-teach model and then the spring hit. And so it's hard to kind of navigate the data on that, but I definitely feel like there's families in need in North Shore of a free preschool. And so we're just working really hard to go out and find those families and make sure that we have a spot for them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, and I traditionally show just our transition to kindergarten. So what you're going to see, this is last year's data. So, and it shows like our itinerant, our sensory program, learning center. And this is just for students coming out of North Shore Early Childhood. This is where they're accessing services come kindergarten.
I also want to comment that Doreen is being really modest here, but her staff has just done a fabulous job of recruiting and opening up programs and really doing some of our inclusive practices work from the very beginning, which will feed into our kindergarten. So I just think, even during a pandemic, Doreen, this is really good work.
It's really good work. And I hope I'm not too modest, because I do want to do a shout out to our early childhood teachers. And that, it really just says something. We are teaching 3, 4, and 5-year-olds remotely, and we have been for a year. And we are literally fully enrolled in our tuition program. We have 46 students on, that we're accessing from the wait list from Head Start and ECAP, and we're serving students with disabilities. And so I'm really, I'm really blessed to have such a fabulous early childhood team in a district that really supports that success in the early years. But they have done such an incredible job to really continue to teach our young students, even in the midst of a pandemic. So thank you, Dr. Reed.
Yeah, props, definitely props.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Reed, because I was going to point out that those 114 slots did not exist prior to the charge. So, and that really was the amazing work of Doreen and her staff, was finding the support for those. And so kudos.
Thank you.
So Dr. Reed and President Swain, I'm going to let you guys guide me here. We're at 6 o'clock and we have about 60 more slides to go.
Oh, goodness. I'm sorry, Obi.
Speed me up if you want me to go faster, but I also want to give lots of time for questions answered and discussions that are good.
You know, Obi, that's a good point. And I think we're planning to go to about 6:45. We had a little bit of a break between our retreat and the study session. So yeah, so thanks, Obi. That's wise counsel. It's so exciting though to see this data. I just, you know, and I know you're proud of it, Obi, and everybody that's presenting this under these circumstances even. So anyhow, I'll go ahead, Doreen.
Yes. So this is just, I think the next 3 slides highlight our goal data. So this data is coming out of Ready Start, so our inclusive practices. We did get, data's been interesting during a pandemic with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Our goal data is an observation-based assessment for children. It's the same assessment tool we use for Walk Kids. So if you know that data. And so we typically have 38 objectives. We, with the guidance of DCYF, went down to 21 objectives. But what I will say is, what I really feel like when I look at this data is data for me is really important at the student level during a pandemic. Data tells a story, but I don't know that this is the story that our Ready Start program really, I don't think it tells the story of really what's happening at the student level. And what I mean by that is it's incomplete data sampling size because the staff's ability to really gather enough information. And what we shared with staff is, please don't mark not yet, because that implies it's a student issue or a student learning issue, when really it could just be our ability to collect data online remotely with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So that's where I just caution us in looking at any of the Ready Start, Head Start, and ECAP data, because I don't feel like it tells kind of the global story. Does that make sense? So this is our data. So and it goes through the different areas: social, emotional, physical, language, cognitive, literacy, and math. And so you'll go through that. Below standard, meeting, and exceeding are the criteria. And then this is what, and this is how the data came out. But again, I would just cautious this. I really feel like this is an incomplete data sampling. And when it gets down to the student level, I feel like it's just a better clarity on really what we're teaching them and what they know.
And then Doreen, I would just add here, you've been doing this gold assessment. This is the 2nd year, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. I think actually the 3rd year.
3rd year?
Yep. And so this is in our ECAP.
So I just to remind us, we're going to transition here in just a second to Dr. Tracy Malloy, and she's going to take us through some other programs. What you're going to see, remember, this is a K3, this is our pre-K3 report. So in some of this data that you're going to see in these next programs, we may have 4th and 5th grade services around these, but we're really just dialed into the K3 level on the next kind of what Dr. Malloy is going to take us through.
All right, thank you, Obadiah. Good evening, everyone. I am going to just briefly let you know that I'll be speaking to information about access to our learning assistance program, to our English learner support program, and also to our elementary advanced placement program, or our EAP programs. I'll explain each program, and then I will share information about the data that we use to identify students. And then I'll identify how many students we're currently serving in each particular one. So this slide shows some learners who have been bequeathed with Sherlock Holmes hats. They are clearly word detectives. These are students who are being supported through North Shore's Learning Assistance Program. And it's a program that offers supplemental services for students who score below the standard level that they should currently be at, given their grade level placement and the time of year in the English language arts. So the one thing that is important to know is that school districts are expected to identify the assessments that they will use to qualify students for the LAP, the Learning Assistance Program. And in North Shore, we have shifted to now using the iReady assessments to help us determine what students know and can do in both reading and in mathematics. And the nature of the iReady assessments, from the fact that we can do an initial diagnostic all the way through the benchmarking assessments that we can use over the course of the year, and then to our year-end assessments, provides us with information that enables us to pinpoint who specifically is below standard based on the assessments itself in comparison to students across the nation. And it allows us to identify students over the course of the year. So that's essential, and it's a really nimble assessment in that regard. What we see here on this slide is data that we used this year to identify students who would benefit from learning assistance. Sorry. It's not necessarily intended to show the current level of student achievement across the board. What you can see is that the blue bars are showing the percentage of students in each grade level who made little or no or negative growth in reading based on the comparison of fall to winter assessments. It's important to note that we were not able to complete end of year assessments last year due to the pandemic. So what we did this year in order to qualify students for learning assistance was to take a look at the fall to winter comparisons. And the blue bar again shows students who made no or negative growth, students who showed typical growth, and then, or the orange bar shows the students who made typical growth, and then the gray bar on the right side of each grade level shows the students who demonstrated accelerated growth. So based on the comparisons of winter or fall to winter reading scores, what we found was that 154 students, or 30%, demonstrated accelerated growth. We had 314 students who, or 61%, who demonstrated on-level growth. And then there were 46 students, or 9% of students, who lost ground from the fall to the winter. And those are the students who are qualifying for learning assistance. Something else that's important to point out as we talk about access to programs that support the intended outcomes for Goal 1 is that the Learning Assistance Program is about moving students from needing support in reading to exiting them as quickly as possible. So that again is one of the reasons why the iReady assessments support this effort, because we can do benchmarking every 4 to 6 weeks to see whether or not students have made the sufficient amount of growth that would then put them on level and then exit them from the program. So next slide, please. In terms of another program that we have to support students in need, we have our English Learner Support Program. And so this slide here is an indication of the type of professional learning that our teachers of the English language program and also our guidance teams have gone through over the past year that helps us to really make sure that we're targeting the students' specific levels of need and identifying the appropriate interventions for them. This particular image off to the right shows a matrix. It's called the critical, it's called the critical data matrix. And this was reviewed by Stephen Gill, who provided our guidance teams and our teachers of English language with a 2-day training around how to utilize a critical data matrix to help identify the support that students need if they are multilingual. We use this critical data matrix specifically in step 3 of our intervention process. And it helps guidance teams to determine exactly the level of need that students have in terms of building their language support and their language proficiency. And it also helps us target the correct interventions toward those students. Stephen Gill, during the training with the guidance teams and with our English language program teachers, encouraged participants to use this matrix as a way to engage in a really robust conversation about the types of support that students can receive in the school building when they're in their classroom, if they're having push-in support, or if there's a specific need for additional support that might happen outside of the actual classroom space. Another new tool that we're using this year is called the English Language Learning Plan. And once again, this is helping us to provide as much information as possible to the teachers who work with students who are multilingual. This English Language Learning Plan is new again for this year, and it is intended to provide classroom teachers with a better understanding of their students' English language proficiency and their English language development needs, so that teachers can then be sure that they are specific in the types of support that they provide students in the classroom spaces. Our English language learner support teams generate the plans and they upload these to Synergy. And this ensures that any staff member who comes across a student who's multilingual can have ready access to students' profiles and also the accommodations that students may need. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see what the profile includes. It's got the name of the student, and then it also has information about students' home languages, about the communication language that they function best in, and about the types of services that they might receive for being multilingual. There's also the quick reference to a student's proficiency level in the 4 areas of language development, which include listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So if I have a student who is a English learner in my classroom and I need to know what language that student speaks at home, I can pull up their information in Synergy and know right away that a student speaks a language at home that might be different from, obviously, English. On the right-hand side of the page, you can see that there are a variety of different accommodations that a teacher can also identify and utilize when they're supporting a student. The accommodations page helps teachers provide equitable access to grade level content. And there's a link at the bottom of the learning accommodations page that enables a teacher to choose, they can use it in the classroom. The older students are also able to contribute information to how the accommodations they need are put together. And that is a really important aspect of this English language learning plan, because students have a voice and an input into how best they learn, and they're able to say, you know, I'd really love to have you post directions in your classroom for me, or I'd actually like you to simplify those, or I might ask you to repeat things for me, right? So when students have the ability to tell a teacher and other staff members how they can support them, they feel very much more invested in their education.
So here's a young singer. I'm going to cut her short, but I do want you to see a little bit of her from Ruby Bridges.
You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulder.
So obviously she's very cute, and I had a hard time cutting the video, and so I actually have the whole video in there, but for time we're going to move on.
And I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Obadiah. And this young learner is someone who, along with any other of her peers who is identified for English language support, will have an English language proficiency assessment that's conducted annually. And the English language proficiency assessment, called the ELPA, it's ELPA 21 because it's for the 21st century, is a test that measures students' progress in those 4 domains of language proficiency. So each year, students are given this assessment, and it helps us to determine whether or not they're beginning language learners, or whether or not they have moved into other levels of proficiency. What I'd like to share with you is that in the spring of 2020, The ELPA was interrupted by COVID, as were many other things. Approximately 47% of our K-12 EL students completed the annual test. So the data is incomplete for the last school year. We know that 916 students completed the ELPA in 2019-20. And we also know that of those students, 208 of those students scored at the proficient level and exited services at the end of the last year. And in order to exit services, students have to be considered proficient across all 4 domains. This particular slide that you see right now is the trend data for English language proficiency for kindergarten and first grade, because again, we're looking just specifically at kindergarten, first, second, and third grade for this data set. And you can see that there are really high bars that indicate progressing and proficient performance for students who are English learners. And we would want to see that. We would want to see higher bars for students demonstrating movement across the continuum of language proficiency. In first grade, only 62% of the students tested last year, and many had incomplete domains that adjusted the overall level. That's also true in terms of the incomplete domains for grades 2 and 3. And so I just want to make sure that you know that we did have 47% of students complete the test in kindergarten. We had 62% of students complete the test in first grade. And in second grade and third grade, which is the next slide, we had 78% of the possible students who tested, and we had 88% of the possible students test. So the data sets that you see are the ones that we did have on record for last year. We also are preparing to engage students in the ELPA as we return to classrooms soon. So we'll hopefully have some complete data sets for this school year. The next slide that we are going to speak about has to do with a third program.
I see.
Yeah.
Mr. Malloy, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but
No worries.
My theme of the last couple of weeks has been a frustration around kids finally getting to come back to school, and then we sit them in front of a device to take a test.
Mhm.
What is that going to look like? Is that going to be part of their very valuable in-person instruction time, or how are we going to do that?
You know, I don't have the specific details, Director Hayes, about what the ELPA test will entail this year. I can tell you that in previous years, the test has been about 2 hours of time, maybe a little bit longer. There's some paper and pencil portions of it, but there's a lot of one-to-one oral language testing. So Ashley Andrews and Elizabeth Meza are working on sorting out what specifically the ELPA testing will look like for the students that return this spring. And I can get you more information about that for the weekly board briefing.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. In terms of the next program that I'm speaking to this evening, that is the Elementary Advanced Placement Program. We've called it EAP. We also have a global umbrella that we use to describe the programs that serve our highly capable students. And it's important to emphasize this evening as we talk about the highly capable program that we engage students in our highly capable programs that are founded on 4 guiding principles. So when we look at students who might be eligible for our accelerated programs, we are looking at a whole child focus. We don't have a one-size-fits-all. And we try and emphasize that if a student qualifies for highly capable program access, it's not that we're going to have them do more work, but we're going to have them do different work. Students that are highly capable are a very diverse set of children, and they have some unique challenges that we have to address when it comes to making sure that they are able to engage with their cognitive peers, as well as to support their learning What is important to also know is that we continue to work to provide equitable access to highly capable services for all students. Ability and talent are equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So we continue to utilize assessments and practices for identifying students for highly capable programs that ensures that we aren't missing students for any one given reason. Next slide. So this identifies the percentage of students that are accessing accelerated programs at the elementary level by ethnicity. And we continue to strive for having the percentage of students in our highly capable programs that matches the percentage of students across the entire school district demographic group. The data again shows us the access of students to the program. It's K-3, and you can see trends over year to year from 2016 all the way to 2020. What I also want to emphasize is we did not put the N size for any given group here because it would be, if we did that for every single column, there would be too much text on the slide. So what you can see is we put an approximate N size. You can see that students that are identified as African American or Black are approximately 2% of our EAP programs. Students that are Asian are approximately 27%. Hispanic or Latino, Latina, 12.3, 2 or more races, 9.1, and then white students are 49%. We have currently identified 18% of our K-3 students as either holistic identified kindergarten or first grade students or highly capable second and third grade students. Over time, our ethnic diversity has remained, as you can see on this slide, fairly static in our highly capable services in grades K through 3. On the next slide is the last one that I'll be showing tonight and speaking to specifically, and that has to do with access to our highly capable programs by student program access. So what that means is students who qualify, for example, as English learners, that's the right-hand set of columns. Students who are identified as needing a 504 plan, or students who have disabilities that are served through special education. You can see the percentages of those students qualifying for highly capable access as well. And then we also have low income students who live in low income situations that are identified as qualifying. And again, year to year, we have about 5% of students with 504s, I think that says 13, it is, the text is very small for me. 13% of students with disabilities, low income students, 11%, and English learners, 12%. And that is of the total population of our program in the highly capable programs. These were the students that were offered highly capable placements. The total number of students that we tested this year to see if they would qualify for highly capable was 3,176. And that's just students in grades K through 3. Of those 3,100 students, 1,726 were kindergarten. And they were screened using the Naglieri, which is a holistic type of assessment. And we also utilize the WA-KIDS, which are those gold assessments that Doreen Milburn spoke to earlier. We use the Naglieri and the WA-KIDS as part of our qualifications for our kindergartners. We also then universally screened all first grade students and assessed a total of 1,450 students in grades 1 through 3. The highlight is that we have seen a significant increase in our overall numbers represented in all areas based on using local norms alongside those universal screeners of students. And so that's a very exciting thing. The most significant increase has been with our English language population of students. We have more English learners accessing our highly capable programs now than we have previously. And that English language population does include students who had an English language status in the previous year and the year that they also entered the English language population includes students who had the EL status, the English language status, the year that they entered the EAT program. They don't include students who were English learners when they entered, but who have currently moved on to a monitoring status. So
I want to, sorry, it's me again, Dr. Malloy.
No
Just
worries.
so I understand what I'm reading in the charts here, because the percentages have not really moved. And there's a couple, particularly our low income and our Hispanic Latinx groups, where the percentages are unfortunately lower than I think we would like. But what I am believing I'm seeing is the overall numbers have increased, in fact, quite dramatically in some of those categories. And it's because we are testing more students. Is that correct?
Yes.
So while the percentages haven't changed, the number of students being served has.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, we are going to look at our next measure here. And this is about social, emotional, physical, and cognitive development. And the measure we've used the last several years to look at this really just hones in on our kindergartners, because the WA kids is what really where we collect some data on this. And as has been said with other things, this WA kids data is incomplete this year. We've collected it, but there's some areas, as Doreen so kind of eloquently said with the WA Gold that she uses, WA kids the same. There's areas where teachers just couldn't observe. And so while we have numbers, they're not necessarily measuring all of our kindergartners. And we have our Executive Director of our Racial and Educational Justice Department, Dr. Chris Bigelow, to walk us through this section.
Okay, let's just go to the next slide, OB. So the Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills, or WAKIDS, is a transitional process that helps to ensure a successful start to the K-12 experience and connect the key adults in the child's life. Teachers work with families and students to gain knowledge and identify skills of their early learners, entering kindergarten. This helps teachers find out what each child knows and can do at the beginning of the school year. Knowing more about the child's entering skills and strengths helps teachers and parents work together to support student growth in the kindergarten year. And it's kind of like a snapshot of what kindergartners are early in their development. So slide 29, next slide here. If you look at the three key components you see here are family connection, early learning collaboration, and whole child assessments. And these are designed to inform instruction, support family involvement, and to build partnership with early learning providers. Also keep in mind that WAKIDS is legislatively mandated, state funded, and a 4-day kindergarten program. So what you see is a description of the three components. You have family connection. Kindergarten teachers host one-on-one meetings with families in the fall to help build relationships and to get to know their child's family. Up to 3 full days of school annually are provided for the district to host family connections meeting at the beginning of the school year. WA kids often come to school with an understanding of how they are supposed to speak, move, behave, express themselves, interact with other children and adults. These beliefs about how they're supposed to conduct themselves are largely informed by their families' cultural backgrounds, which we often talk about, in my department, about building on strengths, instead of the weaknesses. So that's a big part of the equity work that we work on in my department. The family connection component of WA Kids provides an opportunity for families to meet individually with their children's kindergarten teacher. These one-on-one meetings are intended to welcome families to school and provide a safe environment for families to speak freely with teachers. In other words, they help families and teachers to begin to build relationships so they can work together to help children be successful in their early school year. And the earlier these meetings occur, the more helpful they are. This year, instead of identifying 3 specific days for the family connection component, kindergarten teachers provided those family meetings in the first 3 weeks of our North Shore Learns Distant Learning model. If you recall, this was a 3-week period designated as part of the Slow Start SEL work for all students in North Shore School District. This turned out to be a good way for kindergarten teachers to conduct their family meetings and to start their one-on-one assessment. Early learning collaboration, schools collaborated with local early learning providers to develop shared understanding and strong relationships around kindergarten readiness. And to improve communication with parents, families, preparing for kindergartners and promote a smooth transition into the K-12 school setting. The whole child assessment, teaching strategies goals is the WOD Kids assessment. All kindergarten teachers administered at the beginning of the school year. And teachers have September and October to complete this one-on-one assessment and enter data into the Goal online platform. The Goal assessment is required only in fall of the kindergartner, yet can be valuable as a measure to use 3 times a year. Data from the assessment may be used in a variety of ways. And some of those ways are to identify strengths and needs, consider students for special services, provide targeted support, guide planning to communicate skills and progress at parent-teacher conferences, and plan PD for kindergarten teachers. This year, due to remote learning, kindergarten teachers were still expected to conduct the WOD Kids whole child assessment. Yet, given an extension of mid-November for entering their data, teachers were also permitted to gather evidence from families because parents are seen as the child's first teacher. And there is value in having parents and guardians to assist with uploading evidence, know their child's action skills or abilities. And that could be in the form of videotapes or video clips. Okay, next slide will be.
I think I'm a slide ahead of you, Chris. Is this one your?
Let me see here. Make sure we understand one here.
This is slide number 30.
Yeah, you're on slide 30. You should be on slide 30.
Okay.
So in slide 30, you have the assessment components. And the assessment components of WOD Kids is based on the 6 domains that include assessment readiness and the cognitive language, literacy, mathematics, physical and social emotional abilities. For each of the 6 domains assessed this year, students demonstrate strongest readiness in the literacy domain, with language identified as the lowest. Something specific to this year with remote learning, a high number of students were identified as not observed, particularly in the social, emotional, and cognitive domains, which may skew our views of the readiness. For example, in the social emotional domain, while 91.6% students demonstrated readiness, 1,017 of the 1,529 students were not observed. So we have many students that we don't have data on to make a fair judgment. In the cognitive domain, we have 973 students were not observed out of the 1,529 total students, and 16 were not observed in PE. This is comparison to literacy domain, where 233 students out of 1,529 students were not observed, and 162 students were not observed in language, and 104 was not observed in math. And this was all due, of course, to COVID. The data may be skewed a little bit. So this was an unusual year, at least to say, but usually OSPI posts the WOD Kids data from the fall state report card that follows January. However, with the unusual circumstances of the 2020 due to COVID, remote learning, the fall 2020 WOD Kid data was not posted on the state report card this January. So from fall 2020 data, we found nearly a quarter of students have at least one incomplete domain level data out of the 6 possible areas of assessment. So data used should be limited to local formative assessment practices, including facilitating conversations, about students' development between families and schools, but should not be presented and aggregated as representation of overall readiness at the school level or higher without first checking to see rates of assessment completion. So in addition, we're all allowed to submit examples of evidence which has not been allowed in the past. Kindergarten teachers reported that it was more challenging to find evidence within the cognitive, physical, and social emotional domains due to distance learning, which kind of makes sense. Keeping these nuances in mind, knowing about this not observed factor, our 3-year trend data, indicates kindergarten readiness is fairly strong over the 6 domains. Okay, next slide, OB, slide 31. So slide 31 is broken down by ethnicity. Entering kindergarten, students show Asian students with the strongest skills, followed by 2 or more races, and white and Caucasian. Students needing more support in the entry in K-12 is seen by the data for Hispanic students and African American students. There has been merely little change at all for entering our African American Black students, as shown with the 54.5% success rate in 2016 to 55.6% in 2020. Also, these percentages are based on the number of students observed. There is still a large number of students not observed. For example, white students, only 164 out of 670 students were observed and screened in all 6 domains, and 506 observed in 1 or more domains. Asian students, we've seen 118 out of 460 were observed and screened in all 6 domains, and 342 were not observed in 1 or more domains. In our Hispanic students, it was 63 students out of 182 were observed and screened in all 6 domains. 119 were not observed in 1 or more domain. In our African American students, 9 out of 41 students were observed and screened in all 6 domains. 32 were not observed in 1 or more domains. So, and 2 or more races, 38 out of 162 students were observed and screened in all 6 domains, but 124 were not observed in 1 or more domains. So the data is skewed, due to COVID this year. So moving on to slide 32. So the WAKIDS programs. This is the WAKIDS program summary. Over the last 5 years, student readiness as determined by the WAKIDS showed the following. All students, 68.9%. Start looking at year 2016 to 84.8%, 2020 upward. We see an upward trend. If you look at the low income, you see 42%, 42.8% in 2016. And in 2020, you see 54.2, which is an upward trend as well. If you look at the EL population, you're looking at 54.4 in 2016. And in 2019, you see a 69.4. That's also a steady upward trend as well. And our SPED population, you see 37.9 in 2016 to a 33.3 in 2020. And readiness not seen in comparison to other programs. So we don't see that same increase here, but that's something we got to look more into. So this year, 54.2% of students entered kindergarten from low-income family setting demonstrated readiness. This is an increase from fall of 2019, showing 52.6%. 33% of the kindergarten students entering with an IEP demonstrated readiness. Make sure I got that is correct. This percentage is down in comparison to 35% in the fall of 2019. Again, these percentages are based on numbers of students observed. There remains a considerable number of students not observed. For example, you have, look at all students, we have 395 of all 1,529 students were observed and screened in all 6 domains, 1,134 not observed. Low income, 24 out of 75 students from low income backgrounds were observed and screened in all 6 domains, where you have 51 were not observed. In EL, only 4 students were identified as being in the EL program. And the low numbers are due to, in fact, that we didn't have ELPA screener this year, which is how we identify EL students for the program. So these 4 students were identified in pre-K. Students with disabilities, you have 48 out of 120 students with IEPs were observed and screened in all 6 areas. 72 students were not observed. So when I look at the data over the last 5 years, I like to think that due to the equity and social justice work we have been doing over that time frame, we are beginning to see some results. The framework that have advanced social justice work of the district, which includes ongoing training, which includes the practices, as Dr. Reed mentioned earlier, the constant dialogue around equity, and the work with building leaders and with their racial and educational justice building teams about classroom practices and biases. We are beginning to see some shifts in the data. So I think our work helping staff recognize that another child's cultural practices may be very different from their own and needs what needs to be recognized, and valued. I recall in the SAP plan with Tamara, the assistant principal at Fernwood, and she said that even now she is more aware of how she approaches even her youngest learners before understanding what's considered approachable and according to the student's culture. So in other words, she wants to understand first, what is considered, approachable from us students from different backgrounds before she approaches them, because she wants to make sure she values and respects their culture. So this is important, that we see all, and it's more, well, first of all, it is important that we identify, that we hear the voices of all students, but it's more important also that all families are welcome, respected, and treated warmly. So that's what I'm seeing in this data. I don't know if you have any questions. I know we're running out of time, so I went through that pretty quickly, but but I do think we are seeing some improvement based on the work we've done in the last 5 years.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bigelow. We're going to transition to Assistant Superintendent Heather Miller, and she's going to talk about some of our kind of early reading indicators. This video, again, I'll skip through because of time, but if you get a chance to watch it at some point, it's pretty cute when she's stabbing the pencil through and the water doesn't burst out, and just to see her response to it. But she was very excited. And you can see, but I'm going to skip us ahead for time to Assistant Superintendent Heather Miller.
Thank you, Obadiah, and good evening, everyone. And yes, it was a wonderful day with our spending time with our littlest learners today. Thoroughly enjoyed my time. The next 3 slides actually focus on the 6 domains that the iReady assessment tests in the area of reading, grades K-8. And we, of course, are showing you just the results for K-3. So the first two areas on this slide is phonological awareness and phonics. And you can see there the data. We have the fall 19, fall 2020, winter 2020, and winter 2021. So you can see the increases of our students over time in those 2 areas. Next slide, please, Obadiah. There. The next area is high frequency words and vocabulary. Again, the same type of, you can read the slides the same way with the data showing from fall to fall and winter to winter. And Derek Tucci shared that generally our students exhibit positive growth when we're measuring students both from fall to fall and then actually from fall to winter as well. And the last 2 areas we measure are comprehension, both literature and informational text. And the summary of all of that data piece, and I know you'd have time to look at it further. I know we're getting short on time, but we can see that our students do best in the area of phonological awareness, and their lower scores are in the areas of vocabulary and comprehension.
All right, thank you. Dr. Reed, I'm looking at my clock and we're about 3 minutes to the time frame you get us and 2 measures left. I'm looking to you for guidance on how you'd like us to proceed.
I think we do need to proceed because we need, maybe President Swain, if we went up to like 5 minutes to 7, we could take a little break if we can get 2 measures done in the next 10 minutes. Are we at
Yeah, that'd be great. Maybe point out the key data points, and we can kind of read through the slides as they're proposed. Whatever you guys think.
Okay, so
there's a lot of good data here, so yeah.
There is a lot of data, and these 2 sections, we often have SBA data, and we included last year's SBA data at the end with a big kind of watermark on it saying we don't have, for obvious reasons, I don't need to explain why, but we don't have SBA data. So we've tried to really dial into our iReady data. So for this first section, we have Assistant Superintendent Michael Tolley to talk through about achievement gaps.
Right, just similar to the last measure, we are using iReady data to inform this discussion. That's our primary data set for this particular measure within Goal 1. What you see here, of course, is reading. This particular measure looks at both reading and mathematics. We're beginning looking at how those results are reflected within our ethnic population within our schools at each grade level. So the percentages that you see here are the percent of students who are either on or above grade level in reading in this case. And of course, also you'll notice that we have for kindergarten, we have winter of 2020 and then winter of 2021. And we're able to do a little bit of comparison across these 2 cohorts of students. You can see that, of course, our African-American students, we see a significant increase as well as our Latinx students between the winter kindergarten students in 2020 and those that were assessed in 2021. So that's basically what we're seeing within this data set. So if you go to the next slide. As we go to first grade and looking at our ethnic groups here, again, as was mentioned, we have fall data for both 2019 and 2020 side by side. So that's the orange and, I'm sorry, the blue and orange. But if you want to see growth from within a year, of course, you will then have to look at the fall of 2019 and the winter of 2020. So that would be the blue and the gray bar. So you can see the growth. So if we're looking at African-American students, that's that 32% to 47%, that growth. But this particular measure actually also looks at the gap across populations of students. So what we're wondering is the growth that we see within the students, for example, African-American students this year, we went from 47% to 61% increase. But is that narrowing the gap that we see with the other populations of students? And in fact, we actually see that happening as we compare, for example, the 47% of our African-American students in the the winter of 2020 compared to the 72% of our white students. The gap actually reduced quite a bit between this current year from 61% compared to the 73%. So that's our traditional way of looking at gaps, but ultimately what we're wanting to see is the growth within our student populations, and we want to accelerate the growth of those students that are furthest away from educational justice, of course, and as with all of our students. So we are seeing gap closing within our data. The trend obviously is going in the right direction across the board. I'm trying to shorten the presentation in consideration of time, but we do see, again, when you compare the fall to winter data, we do see growth, of course, but we also see accelerated growth within our populations of our most concerned, particularly our African-American and our Latinx students. So here's
Dr. Tully, yeah, sorry. And I actually don't know if you're a doctor, but I'm going to call everybody that because you're all smarter than I am. So there we go. I have a question, and I don't. It's more of a wondering. We have heard two narratives around the increase in percentage of students at grade level based on the iReady scores. One narrative is that it is because parents are helping students and these are not accurately reflecting what students are capable of. The other narrative, perhaps around why African-American and Hispanics have improved, is the bullying decrease and the lack of some of the microaggressions perhaps from staff with the remote environment has also decreased. How do we, as we come back to in person, because I'm wondering how we figure out which one is true, because if the scores go back down, then everybody says, see, I was right. But I'm wondering how we figure out where the accurate cause is.
Unfortunately, your wondering is my wondering also. I've heard those same descriptors as to why our data is as it is, but we, of course, have no way to absolutely know for sure if that's true. What we intend to do, of course, is continue to provide our best instructional opportunities for our students from our teachers, and monitor our student progress and see the results of that. But I cannot speak specifically to which one of those two things may be true.
So I'm gonna, until I'm told to stop, I'm gonna kind of just click pretty quick through. Mr. Tolley's done a nice job of telling us how to read the slides, and this is second grade reading, third grade reading, following the same kind of setup.
Yes.
And then here's by program, and it's just important to note here, there's only really two programs we can identify readily in iReady, and that's our EL program and then students with disabilities. So oftentimes we like to be able to report free and reduced lunch, but we're not able to report that, pull that out of iReady, and also Oftentimes we put 504s and we're not able to pull that out iReady either. So
Well, I will note here, though, this is another example going back to this particular measure is around closing of gaps across populations. Of course, what we see here with our English language learners compared to all students, it was a significant increase in their performance, percentage of students who are on or above grade level to almost equal that of all of our overall population of students.
And I have a really quick follow-up question. There's a Spring iReady still yet to be performed when students are back in buildings, correct? Okay, thanks.
yes.
And then, so beginning, this is reading again by grade level for these particular groups as well. And you can again, when you can see the growth from fall to winter, but also you can see gap closing occurring between the student, our EL students, as well as our students with disabilities.
And so you'll notice, again, just the data arrangement, reading, and then we switch over to math, and you'll just kind of the same flow.
Correct. Yes.
And then again, as I mentioned, SBA data, last year's data, we just put it in there just as a marker, but we've already spent time looking at it. And then this also is a very talented student, which we won't get to see all of, but we saw him at the, and I would just offer.
I didn't play it yet. Counts on me.
Just watch his fingers. I mean, he's. So unfortunately, and so we're going to switch over to Assistant Superintendent David Wellington, and he's going to take you through these slides. And I will tell you, we'll spend a little bit of time on this slide because there's lots of different ways to read this slide, which is helpful to see. So. Dave, are you muted?
Of course I am. I'm going to have you skip this slide and go to the next one, Obi. I'm not going to go through it
okay.
Outlined just because I think it'll take more time. These slides and the information in them are almost, the information certainly is identical to what you just heard from Assistant Superintendent Tully in terms of how students, how we are serving our students in our various programs, both in reading and in math. The way you read the chart, there's a lot here. So I think that maybe that's where I'll spend my time, and then you can read the chart at your leisure. If you look over in the left-hand side, obviously we're slicing the data a little bit more fine in terms of 5 different categories, both mid and above and early on. We want to see increases in those categories where students are reaching standards in their grade levels. And then of course we want to see decreasing numbers of students in one grade level below, 2 grade levels below, or 3 grade levels below. The other way to read the slide is you can see that it's broken down into grade bands, grade kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. And then it's also broken down into years. And so when you think about it in terms of, for example, grade 2, fall and winter, and then again, this year, fall and winter of 20 and 21. And then the way that I like to look at it is in 2 ways. I like to ask, how are we doing in terms of from fall to winter, obviously in terms of how we're doing over the course of the year, but also you can read this chart as you can see, how are we doing year over year in terms of the way that we're serving our students. And so Obi, in 1 minute, you can scroll through all of those, but hopefully that gives you a way to see how to read that particular chart. And again, the conclusions are the same as Mr. Tully talked to us about. The difference with these charts is that it's not comparing across different racial and ethnic groups, but rather comparing within the same racial and ethnic group.
And just adding that to what Mr. Wellington said there, just the philosophy here is we want each of our students to be on or above grade level in their areas. And so rather than compare them to a normative group, really just saying, let's get each of our groups there and what's the gap between where they are and where we want them to be. And same arrangement, reading and then math. And then old SBA data. And some happy students. So lots of information there. Probably could, another couple hours we could spend on it.
Hey,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, it's a great team effort in every region in the district, and really proud of the work.
Thank you, team. We really appreciate it. A lot of data, and I'm sure we might have other questions. We can always follow up through Dr. Reed, and more to talk about later. But thank you for all your great work and gathering all this data. I know it's not easy. All right. We got 4 minutes before the board meeting. I guess we will call this meeting adjourned, and we'll see you in a few. Thank you.